Aloha, Appa, dear friends. Unfortunately, Mrs. Haqiqi has lost her voice tonight, so I'm going to be giving introductions in her place. Yeah. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the local Spiritual Assembly of Santa Monica to our Baha'i Center, and I'd like to thank you for supporting this program. We are honored to have Dr. Nader Saiedi here tonight to speak with us about identity and spiritual journey in the Badi Calendar. And we're honored that he's again accepted our invitation. And so I'd like to introduce him and welcome him. Thank you.
Today it reminds me of a number of sessions that I had the honor of being a speaker here in this center, and I want to thank the local spiritual assembly for extending this invitation again to me to share with you some reflections on Baha'i Calendar or Badi Calendar. I gave 2 talks actually in Los Angeles about this issue, and the reason that I became interested to give such talks, of course, as you all know, is that from next year we are, the Baha'i community all over the world is going to apply details of Badi Calendar for various purposes. So that Badi Calendar becomes internalized and habitualized as part of the life of the individual and part of the community. So for that reason, I thought that some discussion of this topic might be useful. In the discussion that I'm going to have today, I'm going to first talk about the concept of calendar and different types of calendars, and in a sense history of calendar, and after that, in that context, I'm going to discuss the specific features of the Baha'i calendar, the Badi calendar, and symbolic meanings of issues related to that calendar. Concept of calendar is a very important element for life of human beings. Everything that we do in different ways, externally in our relation to nature, or internally in definition of our identity individually and collectively, has to do with some conception of time. The past has to become alive in the present. The past should be represented at present. That's one of the functions of calendar. And that's what, to a large extent, creates identity for people. Let's assume I was born March 1955. That was an event that happened at a particular period of time. But one way is to see this as one event which happened in the past and it is gone and has no connection with anything in present and future. The other possibility is to define myself and my identity in terms of this concept that I am the person who was born at this particular period of time. But to have that event should be represented at present and in the future. For example, you can have an idea that every 10 days become the anniversary of my birthday. So every 10th day after that, I would remember and I would say I was born in this day. So the event of the past becomes part of the present. It is represented. But this, how you do that is absolutely arbitrary. You can look at what day of the week I was born and then celebrate it in that particular day. I don't know actually what day of the week I was born. It changes. Or the month or the year. And the year, as you would see, there are alternative conceptions of year. If you have a lunar year, my birthday would be celebrated in a particular day. If it is solar year, it would be 11 days after that it would be my birthday. So whether it should be 1 year, whether it should be 10 years, these are all arbitrary. There is no logic about it. But the concept of calendar orders time, and through that, the life of human beings are ordered. And with this ordering, past is now present in the future, and this is one of the main factors which are constitutive of identity. This was an example at the individual level, but then we have all these events which socially and collectively defines important events for communities. For example, there is this revolution in France at this particular period of time, and that becomes the beginning of a new type of society, a new type of order, and so on. There is the birthday of Jesus, whenever it was, and it was migration of Prophet Muhammad, for example, from Mecca to Medina, or other events. In the past, these events were primarily defined in terms of emergence of a particular dynasty. When a new dynasty or a new king would come to power and so on, this becomes the turning point of history. History is defined in terms of those times and so on. And those events now has to be celebrated. Those events has to become part of the present and future. So the concept of the year typically becomes something which embraces everything. It is a holistic conception. So everything that has happened is going to be repeated and represented within 1 year. 1 year normally, typically, it's arbitrary, but this is normally the way it is. As you'll see, the Bab uses this concept, and the year become equal to everything. The concept of totality, the concept of everything, all things, kull shay, becomes equal to 1 year. And we'll look at the symbolic significance of this. But concept of time, sociologically speaking, for instance, there is this sociologist, great sociologist, French sociologist, his name is Émile Durkheim. And he looked at concept of time and space for different tribes in Australia and other places. And he came up with the idea that the concept of time is a reflection of the order of religious, social, communal life of the group. So the order of different rituals of the group, usually religious rituals and so on, defines the way time is understood by these people. And the order of geographic construction and the order of the tribe, for instance, their houses and the like, in relation to nature, was reflected in their conceptions of space. So different societies have different conceptions of time and space, and that to a large extent in Durkheim's theory become reflections of the order of their social life, communal life, and so on. And then the concept of identity is defined in terms of the group. And the borders of the group. This same Durkheim always have written that the limits of morality is the limits of group. Namely, if you are part of the group, then you have all these conceptions that you should be loving, you should be caring, and so on. But if someone is outside of your group, then morality ends. Then that one is a stranger, is an object. You can kill, you can discriminate, you can objectify, and the like. So concept of calendar is inseparable from the concept of the group identity, and with that comes also the conception that you have of the group and others, and so on. I'm just saying these things without elaborating on them, that the concept of calendar and ordering time and so on is a very important part of conception of identity for all human beings all over the world. The word calendar is from the Roman word calend, which was the first day of the ancient Roman calendar. But in Arabic or Persian, the word which is used is taqvim, which literally means ordering life or ordering time and the like. For construction of calendar, there are a number of important questions. Each calendar has to deal with these questions. One is the primary question is whether the calendar should be based upon sun or moon. You should have a solar calendar, or you should have a lunar calendar, or you should have a combination of them. In the normal definition of these things in literature, they say that a lunar calendar is the one in which month and year is defined by moon, by the movements of moon. The solar calendar is the one in which the month and the year is defined in terms of the sun. And the lunar solar calendar, a combination of the two, is one in which the month is based upon the movements of moon and the year is based upon movement of the year. Now, these definitions and classifications are extremely simplistic and in most cases are not accurate, as you'll see, but it is useful for beginning discussion on these issues. The lunar calendar is the earliest form of calendar because it is so easy for all people looking at transformation of moon and different stages of moon is something very easy, and you can calculate that very easily. It's a very perceptive issue. And so religious rituals in the past also were strongly connected with the concept of moon and stages of moon. Many cultures noting the fact that the stages of the female body is more or less the same as the stages of the movement of moon, have always defined moon as the goddess of fecundity and creativity and the like, and it was a very important part of religious rituals in so many cultures and so on. As time goes on and civilization becomes more sophisticated, lunar calendar is not sufficient. And the reason for that is that lunar calendar is not going to be able to predict in an accurate fashion different seasons. So if agriculture, for example, becomes important, or if you want to sail on the sea, you have to be conscious of the seasonal changes, and on that basis you act. When to have seeds, to cultivate the seeds, when to have harvest, and so on. These are based upon seasonal changes. But if you have a lunar calendar, even if it is lunar solar calendar in a sense, and it is based upon the movements of the moon, then the beginning of the year sometimes is in spring, sometimes is in winter, sometimes is in summer, and so it changes. It's very difficult to make it compatible with varieties of practical needs of civilization. And so when societies advance in different ways through agriculture and other concerns and so on. Usually, lunar calendar is replaced by some sort of solar calendar. However, even most solar calendars are partly lunar, and most lunar calendars are partly solar. So the earliest definition that I gave you is very superficial. The key for this is the fact that in many of the calendars, the number of the months is 12. You have 12 months within a year. Now, this concept is both lunar and solar. It is lunar, any calendar which has 12 months, the year consists of 12 months, is a lunar calendar. At least lunar element is a very important element of that. And the reason for that is that the movements of the moon, the cycles of the moon, 12 becomes the closest number for the movement of the sun. Namely 12 lunar months, 12 and a half almost, becomes one year. So it is closer to 12 rather than 13. So the choice of the fact that calendars normally had, many of them, not all of them, had 12 months is based upon the idea that moon was the standard of definition of time, and then because in the conception of year, sun and movements of sun and seasonal changes are taken into consideration, then the closest number of movements of moon, which corresponds to movement of the sun, becomes 12. So when you have 12 months, it is actually meaning that both the concept of solar is present and the concept of lunar is present. And this means that almost all calendars that we have are neither solar nor lunar. They are some sort of combination of solar and lunar. There are a few exceptions that you have purely lunar calendars or you have purely solar calendars. As you would see, the Baha'i calendar, the Badi calendar is one of these. It is purely a solar calendar. There is no element of lunar calendar. There is one little exception to this that I'll talk about it later. One of the lunar calendars that stayed in the march of civilization is the Islamic calendar. The Islamic lunar calendar is based upon the Quran. So there are statements in the Quran, verses in the Quran, which defines the year as consisting of 12 months. And it says that this is the will of God, and in creation of heaven and earth, He made it that way. And the Quran defines moon as the basis of computation of time and year. So moon is, and the movements of the moon is a central element. But this, of course, means that year becomes 12 lunar months, which becomes approximately 354 days. And that is almost 11 days short of the actual movement of the sun. And for that reason, this calendar has never been a practical calendar for society. So the basis of the Islamic calendar, lunar calendar, is in the Quran, but it was Omar during his Khilafat, his caliphate, that the Islamic lunar calendar was identified. The migration of Prophet Muhammad was decided at this time by Omar. Usually people, the books say that Imam Ali suggested that and Omar accepted that. So migration of Prophet Muhammad becomes the beginning of the calendar. So it becomes the first year. But not the day of migration, but the first of Muharram became the beginning of that calendar. Islam appeared, of course, in Arabia, and the dominant calendar in Arabia among the Jews and among the Babylonian culture, all of them was a sort of lunar calendar which consisted of 12 months, but then there was an occasional 13th month which was added, normally 7 times per 19 years. So within 19 years, 7 times this addition of 13 months took place, which made it then the lunar calendar equal to the solar calendar. Namely, it made adjustments for that. But the Quran, when it talks about the idea that God has made the number of the months 12, adds that this practice of adding these 13 months is ziyadatun fil kufr, namely is an addition in infidelity and disbelief and so on. So it is strongly rejected. The reason for this, of course, is that for the Arabs, they had particular months in which fighting and war was prohibited. And the idea of when to adopt this 13 month was used arbitrarily at different times in order to make it convenient for different tribes for their military campaigns and purposes and so on. So they did not use this in a consistent fashion, and probably that is the reason that it is very categorically prohibited in Islam. So the connection, the Jewish calendar, which the source of that is Babylonian calendar, which after Cyrus freed the Jews, they adopted that calendar, and in pre-Islamic Arabia that calendar was there, was a lunar calendar which added occasionally this 13 months. And in Quran, that addition of 13 months is categorically prohibited, so it became a much more lunar calendar. But still, the fact that it's 12 months, it means that it is recognition of the sun and movements of the sun. So it is not a purely lunar calendar. It is the closest to a lunar calendar, but in fact that one is also a lunar solar calendar. The only calendar which was really completely purely solar calendar is the Aztec calendar. Aztec Mayan calendar was a very precise calendar, ancient calendar, in which a year consists of 360 days plus 5 additional days. And those 5 additional days are defined as unnamed, namely days that have no names, nameless days. And they are defined as not an ordinary set of days. That 360 days becomes 18 months, and each month it has 20 days. So the year consists of 18 months, not 12 months. 18 months, and each month has 20 days. As you see in this calendar, there is absolutely no connection to the moon. It's purely a solar calendar. As a matter of fact, the Badi calendar is the closest among all existing calendars to the Aztec calendar. Instead of being 18 months, each month 20 days, as you'll see, it becomes 19 months, and each month has 19 days. The unit, instead of being 360, becomes 361. In normal solar calendars, usually the unit is 360 days plus some additional complementary days. The most famous and the most prevalent calendar in the world, of course, is the Gregorian calendar, which came into existence during the 16th century. And it was based upon a correction, some little modifications on the Julian calendar. Julian calendar is a calendar that Julius Caesar created that. And he learned that from Egypt. So the source of the calendar, which is the dominant calendar right now all over the world, is Egypt. The Egyptians had this conception because Nile was so important for them, and the movements of Nile, flooding, and activities of irrigation and agriculture following the flooding and so on, they took place in very predictable times of the year in a seasonal fashion. And for that reason, sun became very, very important for Egyptians. And so they developed this particular calendar, which again, 360 is the key. So there are 12 months, each one of them 30 days, which becomes 360. And then there are 5 sacred days, and those 5 days are considered to be the birthday of 5 of the gods. 2 of them are goddesses, 3 of them are gods. They are born from the union of the supreme gods of heaven and earth. Through them, 5 children are born, and the birthday of them are these 5 days. They are very sacred days. When Julius Caesar went to Egypt and fell in love with Cleopatra, one of the things that he learned there was this calendar. The Roman calendar before Julius Caesar at first was a calendar which consisted of 10 months. The original Roman calendar had 10 months. And so it is one of the calendars which can be closer to a pure lunar calendar. The name of the months that we have was based upon that time. We say September, October, November, December. September means the 7th month. October means the 8th month. December means the 10th month. But for now December is not the 10th month, it's the 12th month. September is not the 7th month, it's the 9th month. The reason was that it was so inadequate and it contradicted so much the seasonal changes that they added 2 months in the beginning. They added January and February. That in the original one did not exist. But still, this calendar was significantly short of predicting the seasonal changes, and that's why Julius Caesar learned this from the Egyptians and brought some Egyptian experts, and after he had complete political power, one of the legislations that he made was a new calendar. So the Julian calendar was created. This is 45 BC. And that calendar was a great calendar. The only problem was that it was 11 days short, 11 minutes short. 11 minutes is not that much. But, and gradually birthday of Jesus, which everybody came up with different times and dates and so on. Persians have Shab Yalda, which is going to be soon. That Yalda is from the word birth, milad, and is one of the ways that the concept of the Jesus birth was entered in Iranian culture. So partly Shab Yalda is a reflection of that. But in any case, after Julius Caesar's Julian calendar, time went on, and in 16th century, we had problems. Namely, those 11 minutes have combined, and so 10 days, the calendar was behind from the astronomical natural calendar. And it was at this time that Pope Gregory decided on the basis of lots of intellectuals talking about this and so on to make changes, and they created the new Gregorian calendar, which has just a few seconds. It is short, just a few seconds, not 11 minutes. And so this has become the dominant calendar. In Iran, the Zoroastrian calendar normally understood the time as 360 days plus 5 more additional days. And these 360 days were 12 months, each one of them 13 days and so on. Then a calendar came in. Then later on, because of coming of Islam to Iran, the lunar calendar became the official calendar of Iran in varieties of forms and ways. But Omar noted very soon that this Islamic calendar is not functional for taxation. Namely, many times, according to the lunar calendar, people have to give taxes on the basis of harvest when harvest has not taken place yet because it didn't fit the seasons. So they created this informal solar calendar just for the purpose of taxation, but it was not the dominant calendar. So in Iran, during the Seljuk dynasty, Malik Shah, Jalaluddin Malik Shah, he had Khayyam, this great scholar of Iran, to create this new calendar, which is called Jalali calendar, because the name of the king was Jalaluddin Malik Shah. It's Jalali calendar, and in the modern Iran, after Constitutional Revolution in 1911, the parliament, Iranian parliament, made slight revisions to that and made that calendar, namely a solar calendar, the calendar of Iran. And then in 1925, Reza Shah, the king of Iran, made a few additional adjustments. For example, the name of the months returned to the Zoroastrian names. From then on, this has been the dominant calendar of Iran. It's a very precise calendar. The beginning of the year is defined astronomically, not on the basis of a particular formula in understanding equations for the year. But it's the moment of equinox. When equinox happens, the moment that day and night are equal in the just beginning of spring, that becomes the beginning of the new year. And that becomes the first day of the year, which is Nowruz. Nowruz means new day, or the day of beginning, the day of inception. And that is a very interesting calendar. And one of the big surprises for me is that after Islamic Revolution, they did not reject or abrogate or remove this solar calendar. Because according to the text of the Quran, it is very explicit statements of the Quran, calendar must be based upon lunar calendar and so on. So this is absolutely unacceptable. And yet, maybe for practical reasons, or maybe the culturally celebration of different elements of this time is so tied to the Iranian identity, like Nowruz, like this Shab Yalda. It's a concept of seasonal. It's not lunar concept. It's a solar concept and so on. So that after Islamic Revolution, they decided that they should not challenge this particular. But this is one of the greatest surprises for me, that this should have been one of the first things that should have been removed, and a return to lunar calendar, because that's not an arbitrary thing. It is explicit statements of the Quran. In any case, what I mentioned in an inconsistent fashion was some discussion of how calendars are constructed and created, and you see the most important question really is whether it should be solar or lunar. And then under that, there are a number of other questions. What should be the first day of the year? Following Zoroastrian traditions, Iranians take the beginning of spring as the first day of the year. But for instance, in Gregorian calendar, the beginning of January is the first day of the year. So this is a question that is part of definition. And then what should be the first year of the calendar? And that depends on how society conceives one particular event, one particular episode as the turning point of history. Okay, let me now skip this discussion of different types of calendars and so on and go directly to the Badi calendar. I hope that you are not all too tired. Ready? The Badi calendar, Badi means new, wonderful, wondrous, new, is based upon the consciousness of revival and resurrection in Baha'i culture. The entire writings of Baha'i faith is based upon historical consciousness, concept of history, concept of time, concept of dynamism, change. This is central in Baha'i theology, Baha'i philosophy, Baha'i social theory, and so on. If you ignore everything else, there are 2 points that Baha'i faith added or brought to religious discourse and philosophical social discourse. One is historical consciousness. Everything is changing. Human being is a spiritual entity, and because it is a spirit, not nature, it is changing, it is transforming, it changes itself, it changes the world, and so it's dynamic. Everything changes, and with that means that everything has to change through time and so on. Historical consciousness, concept of historicity, time, temporality, and development. This is one of the fundamental elements of Baha'i identity and Baha'i conception. And the other one, of course, is a global consciousness, namely the idea that all are one, that ultimate truth of everyone and everything is one and the same. These 2 elements, the historical consciousness and the global consciousness, these 2, among other things, are the most important fundamental introductions, contributions of Baha'i consciousness to social, cultural, theoretical, political, religious discourse, and so on. And both of them, of course, are based upon one other premise, but that premise in some ways has been existing in all religions. That is a spiritual definition of reality. Namely, ultimate reality is defined as something spiritual, as reflection of God. So if you want to understand really Baha'u'llah's message, Baha'i identity, and so on, it's the unity and combination of these 3 principles. Spiritual definition of reality, historical consciousness, global consciousness. That is Baha'i faith. If you look at the Badi calendar crystallizes and exemplifies in very explicit, strong, beautiful, symbolic forms all these 3 concepts. And they are all inseparable from each other within definition of Badi calendar. The first point, which I almost mentioned that, is that the Badi calendar is purely a solar calendar. Year does not consist of 12 months. It consists of 19 months. Has no connection with movements of the moon. Now, the most important philosophical principle behind this purely solar calendar of the Baha'i faith is the concept of unity and a new definition of identity. So let me explain this a little bit, and then I can elaborate. If you want to understand the ultimate message of the Bab. Why? No, he came, and he has written so much. But what is the ultimate meaning or message of all his writings, which is reaffirmed in the writings of Baha'u'llah after the Bab? If you want to know what is that ultimate message, that ultimate principle is a discussion of identity. Namely, according to the Bab, everything is a mirror. And according to the Bab, mirrors consist of two parts. One is the glass of the mirror, one is the image which is reflected in the mirror. See? Think about mirror. Mirror has two parts. One is glass. But it becomes mirror because this glass becomes a vehicle for reflection of an image. But they are two different things. If you have a mirror here, it is glass. And if I'm right now in front of it, my image is there. But I can go, remove myself here, and somebody else comes or something else would come, and it would reflect something else. The glass has remained the same, but the image has changed. To be mirror means to have glass and to reflect image. Image and the glass are the two constitutive parts of mirror. So for the Bab, everything is a mirror. And that means that we all have particular glasses. My glass is different from your glasses. My glass is a little bit more red than yours. And trees are also a different type of glass. Mountains are a different type of glass. All different human beings each one of them have a different type of glass. Now, according to the Bab, and according to the Baha'i faith, humanity so far has primarily understood the truth of people and things, the true identity of things, in terms of the characteristics of the glasses. I'm a sociologist. I have studied as a sociologist, although right now I don't teach sociology. But sociologists are obsessed with what they call identity politics. The more progressive they are, the more identity politics is emphasized. But identity politics is primarily the idea that our true identity is nothing but our gender, our race, our ethnicity, our nation, our social class, our religious, our culture, and the like. So my language, the group that I belong to, my ethnicity, and so on, these define who I am. Am I a male or a female? Am I black? Am I a white? Am I Persian? Am I Japanese? Do I speak German? Do I speak Spanish? Whatever. These are what is perceived to be my truth, my identity. As I mentioned, social sciences in 20th century and 21st century have been promoting this message. According to the Pope, there is a fundamental problem with this viewpoint, with this philosophy, because immediately it makes people estranged from each other, alienates people from each other, alienates people from nature, and defines people in terms of a particularistic group, category that they belong to. So outsiders becomes objects, become strangers. And when you objectify others, the others, as Durkheim said, that the borders of morality is the border of the social group. It becomes so easy to kill. It becomes so easily to oppress, to discriminate, to hate. For the Bab, we have to create a new culture. What is the characteristic of that culture? The most important basic principle of that culture is that the truth of mirrors is not characteristics of glasses. The truth of mirror is the image which is reflected in the glasses. And the idea is that all mirrors of beings are glasses which are reflecting one and the same reality. That one and the same reality is God. And it is the reflection of divine attributes in everything. according to the capacities of different things, which constitute the truth and true identity of things. So I become, for example, a human being. My identity, my true identity is no longer the fact that I speak this language, or I'm born in this particular part of the world, or color of my skin is this way or that way, or my social class is this way or that way, or what is the level of my education, or what other social categories. I become image of God. This was the lesson of the first page of Torah, which is the most progressive statement that has ever been made. And if Jews and Christians and Muslims, who all believe in this statement, had understood this, we would have had no problem in the world. No problem. Problem is that none of them ever understood this. The entire message of Baha'u'llah, the entire message of the Bab is affirmation of that same fact, that what defines my truth is the fact that I am one with you. We are all one and the same. We are different, but our truth is one and the same. We are all image of God. But being image of God, or manifestation of divine attributes, for Baha'i is shared by everything. Everything that exists is a reflection of divine attributes. It's not just humans. The entire reality becomes one. And of course, the fundamental principle of this new form of consciousness is that everything becomes sacred, everything becomes beautiful, everything has right. And so the culture of human rights, culture of democracy, if I'm sacred and you are sacred, and we both, our truth is nothing but a reality in which nothing can be seen except God, then the only mode of regulating society and so on is consultation. Because we are all sacred and we all are reflections of God. Nobody can be a slave. Nobody can be discriminated. Nobody can be a follower of this scholar or that religious leader or anything like that. It's a new way of ordering society and creating the world. So Baha'u'llah's social teachings are reflections of a metaphysical principle. This is very important. People who are not familiar with the Baha'i faith, or their familiarity because of habituation to the Baha'i faith is very superficial, they look and they try to find something in Ottoman society, something in the West, this author or that author. They try very hard to say that, oh, this statement of Baha'u'llah has been mentioned by this person also 100 years ago or something like that. And to look for the sources of Baha'u'llah's worldview and so on in different sources and different places and so on. It is true that Baha'u'llah was in interaction with its environment, whether in Iran or in the Ottoman Empire, and there was mutual influence and impact. But the ultimate source of his worldview is consistent application of this fundamental metaphysical principle that I talked about. And methodic, consistent application of that metaphysical principle made Baha'u'llah simultaneously to defend, for instance, political democracy, but at the same time talk something that nobody who defended political democracy, either in Ottoman Empire or Iran or outside, even in the West and so on, would do, namely defending the concept of global security. At the same time, he would talk about the elevation of the rights of women. At the same time, he would reject slavery. At the same time, he would talk about necessity of separation of church and state and all other things. One universal auxiliary language. It is not accidental that all these different aspects of this issue consistently and harmoniously are present, because it was not product of this eclectic taking of this source or that source, of this person or that person. It is reflection of a metaphysical principle which is applied, a spiritual principle, which is applied consistently. And therefore, the concept of democracy for Baha'u'llah is qualitatively different from concept of democracy as it has been discussed or has been practiced. I have mentioned this in lectures that we had a long time ago, that Baha'u'llah for more than 30 years, was the first Iranian who talked of political democracy. Nobody before Baha'u'llah in Iran has talked of political democracy. And Abdul Baha then was the second Iranian who talked of political democracy. But his conception, their conception of political democracy, is not the idea that people go and vote. Their conception of political democracy is conception of consultation, loving each other, listening to each other, and communication and love of everybody. That is the democracy of Baha'u'llah and so on, which then he extends it to the collective level. I shouldn't have discussed this, but I became affected by that. So anyway, this is the message of Baha'i faith. Now look at the Baha'i calendar, and you see the realization of this fact. So for Baha'i faith, the true identity of everything is one and the same, namely the fact that we are all reflections of divine attributes, that we are all one and the same. It's unity in diversity. We are different, but different expressions of the same reality, of the same truth, which is a spiritual principle. The Bab makes the concept of the year equivalent to the concept of society, community, and equivalent to the concept of everything. So everything, a year, as I mentioned, year becomes a totality, which includes everything. Bab makes a year symbolic of everything and the community, society. And he finds a particular word in Arabic or Persian that becomes expressive of that same concept. And that word is kull shay. Kull shay, as Persians would say, and Arabic, kull shay, means all things, everything, means everything. Usually it is translated as all things, everything, whatever exists. But you know that in Arabic, in Hebrew, and even in Latin, different letters have particular equivalent numbers. And this is one way of symbolism and extending the different layers of the meaning that was used by Bab frequently. The word kull shay, all things, numerically is equal to 361. The Baha'i concept of calendar and year is defined in terms of 361 plus 4 or 5 additional days, but the unit is 361. And there is no other way, because the year, the movement of the sun, is 365 days and about 1/4 of the day, about 8 hours. 8 hours and a few minutes. For that reason, it is not compatible, it is impossible to divide it into a very consistent number of days or number of months, unless you make months change. So some months are 32 days, some months are 31 days, some days are 30 days, some days are 29 days, and in different calendars it has been used in different ways. All of them are based upon lunar conception, because these are all close to the lunar movements and so on. So 361 is chosen by the Bab, and 361 is equal to all things. The year becomes symbol of all things and of the Babi community. The Babi community is defined, according to the Bab, in terms of repetitions of 361, repetitions of kull shay. By the way, kull shay is also the title of the Persian Bayan. Both Persian Bayan and Arabic Bayan are called by the Bab kull shay, all things. But I don't have time to engage in that, and it's not directly related to our discussion, so we'll skip that. So both society and everything becomes 300, all things, 361. Now, the year becomes reflection of all things, but the year becomes, this 361, these all things, becomes equal to 19 times 19. And 19, because of course, becomes the number of the days in a month. So the year becomes multiplication and reflection of the month. You have identity of month and year. Year and month, although they are different, but in reality they are one and the same. The word month is from the word moon. In Persian, even they are the same word. We say mah. Mah means moon and also means month. Sometimes I'm talking fast, I confuse. I want to say moon, I say month when I talk in English because I'm translating the word mah from Persian. In any case, but then the Bab does something very different and novel. Namely, he makes the month also equal to 1 day. So the entire year became reflection of the month, which is 19 days, and the month becomes also reflection and identical with the day. How he does that? The word for one, which is wahed means one. In Arabic, this particular, or Persian, this particular word, wahed, is numerically equal to 19. So 19 became literally one. And this is crucial for the Bab and his metaphysics and his theology and his discussions and so on. So the year became multiplications and reflections of month. The month became identical with the day. And the day becomes reflection of the sun. So all things now, this is that metaphysical viewpoint, which is now defined in the form of a particular calendar. All things, all beings are one and the same, and they are nothing but reflections of the divine attributes, reflections of the Son of Truth. At the level of society, the Bab makes the same thing. The Baha'i community comes to existence. The Bab becomes the beginning. The first 18 who accept him become the letter of the living. And together they are 19. And these 19 are always called Wahed Awwal or Wahed Awwaliye, the first Wahed, the first one, the first unity. It's difficult to translate these things. But Wahed or unity for the Bab always means 19. And this is very important. He says that in letters of the living, there are 18 letters of the living, and he praises them so much. But when he praises them, he says that you praise them because what is being praised is not the characteristics of the glass of these letters of the living. What is being praised is the reflection of divine attributes in these glasses. So in all the 18 letters of the living, you see nothing but reflections of the Bab, which becomes reflection of God. And so they are, in all the letters of the living, you see nothing but the same thing, which is the truth of the Bab. And so 19 becomes literally one. And if you look at the 19 and you pay attention to the characteristics of glass, not as a mirror which is reflecting the sun, then you have missed something. And this 19 becomes the beginning cell for emergence of the Baha'i community. So the second 19 people who accept the Bab become the second unity. And then it continues till you have 361 people who have accepted the Bab. They become the first all things, the first Kull Shay. And then it repeats. So the person who accepts the Bab and is the 362nd person becomes the first person who accepts the Bab from the second Kull Shay, from the second all-being. So all-being becomes more or less equivalent of 1,000 for us. Normally we order everything in terms of 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. For the Bab it becomes all-thing. And what is important, again, is that in all reality, all society, you see reflections ultimately of the 19, of the first 19, primary 19, which is the letters of the living and the Bab. And in that you see nothing but the divine revelation. All beings become reflections of divine revelation. And this is central in the writings of the Bab. In his Kitab al-Asma, the book of names, the full title of that book is the book of the names of all things. He has a chapter, one of my favorite chapters. It's under the title Bismillah al-Azra al-Azra. In the name of God, the supreme cultivator, the supreme sower. It's the same word, Azra, Azra, from the word Zare. Zare means farmer, peasant, farmer. And the Bab makes Zare, peasant, one of the names of God. Zare was traditionally understood as the lowest social rank in the society. Namely, almost nobody, nothing. The Bab makes Zare one of the names of God. And he argues that God cultivates the seeds of his words, of his revelation in the hearts of the people, in the souls of the people. And he says that this is a particular unique type of seed, that it should instantly yield fruits. It's very beautiful, discussions of the Bab. But what he says there is that therefore you have to treat the peasants, the farmers among you exactly in the same way that you treat the kings among you, the amirs, the rulers. And he says the reason is that both the peasant and the ruler, they are one and the same. They are both reflections of divine attributes, of the names of God. So this concept is not just an abstract concept. It becomes a concept, becomes a social, political concept of how you regulate society. When Baha'u'llah says, for instance, لَيْسَ فِي الثَّرْوَةِ وَالْمَالِ بَلْ فِي الْخِدْمَةِ وَالْكَمَالِ, if I remember correctly, that honor, distinction, glory is not in wealth or degree of accumulation of property, but it is in the capacity for service and spiritual perfection. He's affirming in a different way that same principle. Anyway, let me say in 5 minutes maybe one other important principle of the Badi Calendar. The Badi Calendar, because of what I have discussed, becomes affirmation of the presence of God in the world, namely the concept of a spiritualization of life. It is one of the fundamental principles of the Bab that when you look at the name of anything, you have to see that as abbreviations of different names of God. So everything suddenly becomes so most noble and so most beautiful. The example that he gives is of Sang, piece of rock, something which is totally useless in terms of normal conceptions. But he says, see in the S or sin of Sang, Sobuh. In the N, see Nur, light. And in the Kaf, you see Karim, which is all bountiful. So Sobuh, which is the sanctified, holy. Suddenly, the word Sang becomes embodiment of the names of God, Sobuh, Nur, and Karim. The idea is that everything, the truth of everything is one and the same, and that's God, and reflections of divine attribute. And so you have to treat everything and everyone in that way. It's affirmation again of that unity in diversity, that true identity. That's why I made it title of this identity and spiritual journey. So far I have talked about identity. Now, the Badi calendar becomes symbolism of this. Time becomes spiritualized. All things become, which is everything, becomes filled with spiritual names of God. So the names of the months and the names of the days of the month become all different names of God. The month of Baha, or the day of Baha, the month of Allah, Jalal, whatever. Even you have month of, or the day of questions. Remember that? Masail. This is one of the puzzles that people think, what does it mean? What name of God is Masail? There is a tablet of the Bab which has explained and clarifies indirectly this. The name of that tablet is, the title of that, Jawab Istifhamat Quran, namely answer to the questions of the Quran, questions in the Quran. Because according to holy texts, many times when God talks, God asks questions. For example, that famous question of God, am I not thy Lord? Remember? Alastu bi rabbikum. And then humanity answers, or everything answers, yea. You know, it's a primordial covenant of everything with God. When you read Quran or all holy texts and so on, frequently God asks questions. It doesn't mean that God doesn't know the answer, but asking those questions are the way for educating, for realizing the potentialities of people, things, and so on. It has very similarity with the Socratic type of methodology and so on. So according to the Bab, questions become again one of the attributes of God. And that is why we have questions, one of the names of months and days and so on. Again, one of the divine attributes and so on. In this way, the Badi calendar is similar to Zoroastrian calendar. In the Zoroastrian calendar, the names of months and days and so on are all based upon different angels, different holy beings, and of course, elements are sacred, water, fire, and so on. So Aban is the month of water. Azar is the month of fire, which are the name of the months even in the present Iranian calendar. And it's a beautiful concept. Sacredness of nature, spiritual orientation, and so on. You can see that the Baha'i calendar is reflecting a lot of influence of Zoroastrianism and original Iranian culture. You have to forget about the fact that all Iranians now are used to solar calendar, because the solar calendar from early 20th century have been the dominant calendar for everybody. But at the time that the Bab came, or Baha'u'llah came, the only calendar that they knew, the only dominant calendar was the lunar calendar. And as I mentioned, it is based upon the Quran. It's not an arbitrary calendar for them. It is justified by the Quran. Now think about the Bab, this young merchant from the Shiraz, coming and creating a new calendar, abrogating the lunar calendar completely, replacing it with not a solar lunar calendar, with a purely solar calendar. This was a revolution. In addition to that, he made the beginning of the day Nowruz, which is another very important sacred Iranian Zoroastrian concept and so on. And in his analysis of the names and so on, the names of days and months also become the names of God. Becomes spiritual. Every time becomes filled with God. Everything becomes spiritualized and so on. In all these things, we have a strong continuity between the Baha'i faith and Zoroastrians. An additional element that Baha'u'llah added is another reflection of the same spiritual principle. For the 4 or 5 days, which becomes additional days after 361. The Bab did not make any particular arrangement. It's not present in his discussions. So Baha'u'llah made this new arrangement. And the arrangement is that the month of fast becomes the last month. The last 19 days of the year, the month of Allah, becomes the month of fast. And these 4 or 5 days precede the month of fast. So it is between the 18 months and the 19 months. And of course, one of the implications of this is that Nowruz, the day of celebration and joy, comes immediately after 19 days of fasting. So the significance and the joyful character, the celebratory character of Nowruz becomes much more heightened because of this. But in terms of the philosophical, theological, spiritual meaning and symbolism of this, there is a subtle thing going on. This is, of course, my impression, and to some extent is a personal understanding of this, so I don't insist on that. But I'm very comfortable personally with this that I share with you. Every day of the month, every day of the year is reflecting one of the names of God, one of the attributes of God. But these 5 or 4 days, these intercalary days, they become reflection of all names of God. They become the days of Ha. Ha is abbreviation of Hova, namely He, reference to God. The 4 or 5 days together completely becomes reflection of all names and attributes of God, different from ordinary days, which each day is reflecting one of the attributes of God. And this is, of course, reference to the event of Rezvan. In the Rezvan, the first day of Rezvan, Baha'u'llah declared that at this time, at this moment, God has revealed himself with all his name and all his attributes upon everything. He expressed 3 principles, and this is the third one, and in my understanding is the most important of them all. And so with the beginning of Rezvan, God is now manifesting himself to entire reality with all his names and attributes. And the days of Ha become reflection of this cosmic event. It was the event which made Nejasat, the fact that certain people are impure or dirty and so on, abrogated, make slavery abrogated, replaces that with the culture of love, communication, and human rights. So you have the days of God, Ayyam Ha, followed by days of fasting, which is rejection of anything which has to do with injustice and hatred and so on. This is the way fasting is understood in the writings of the Bab, in Persian Bayan, for example, and in Baha'i writings and so on. And this process of spiritualization brings us to the first day of the year, namely the Nowruz, the first day of spring. But that day happens to have a particular name. It's one of the names of God, but the name of God happens to be the day of Baha, of the month of Baha. And according to Baha'u'llah, according to the Bab, Baha is the most great name of God. Namely, it is the name of God which contains within itself all different other names and attributes of God. So you have a situation that 5 or 4 days becomes the days of God, followed by this process of spiritualization, and then in a dialectical synthesis you have one day which becomes the supreme day of God. In the Persian Bayan, the Bab says that the day of Nowruz is the day of God, is the supreme day of God, and he says that it is equivalent to the concept of the point, namely the truth of the manifestation. Everything originates, is created out of the manifestation, And when the civilization, that spiritual civilization has ended, it returns again to the point, and the point appears in a new fashion. The day of Nowruz becomes the equivalent of the concept of the point, like the primal point, the Bab, or any manifestation of God, from which everything originates in a year as a totality, as a culture, and then it returns again to that which becomes the beginning of a new creation, of a new dynamic reality, and so on. My concluding point of discussion of Baha'i calendar has to do with that notion of a spiritual journey. One very important point that the Bab emphasizes in his writings frequently in varieties of ways is that the concept of the 19 months and the concept of 19 days within the month become a process of a spiritual journey. For him, these 19 months represent 4. See, 19 became 1. But here, 19 becomes 4. The reason is this Islamic idea that all truth has been contained within the opening phrase of the Quran, namely, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim happens to consist of 19 letters. And it consists of 4 words. The first has 3 letters, Bes. The second one, Allah, has 4 letters. Then Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, each one of them have 6 letters. So 3, 4, 6, 6. It has to become 19. So for the Bab, the concept of the year means a process of a spiritual journey. He uses the word suluk, yaslukun. In Arabic bayan, he uses this particular word suluk, that he says that people have to go through these 4 stages of a spiritual development, each one of them representing one. For example, what are these 4 stages? Everything becomes defined in terms of these 4 stages. It becomes fire, it becomes air, it becomes water, and it becomes dust. Just like Zoroastrians, they become sacred vehicles of a spiritual reality. They become 4 layers of human spiritual reality, namely heart, fu'ad, inner heart, and then intellect or spirit, ruh or aql, and then it becomes soul or nafs, and then it becomes body. These are 4 layers of human reality. And 4 colors, 4 different forms of praise of God, tasbih, tahmid, tahleel, and takbir, with that order. And other things. Each one of these discussion of that requires an independent discussion. So for the Bab, the purpose of life and construction of time, ordering of time in this way, is that within a year, and the same thing in a different fashion within a month, because a month is also 19 days. One has to go through all these 4 stages of a spiritual reality, identify with them, and become one with them. And so through the year, you become one with all reality. It is a process of a spiritual journey and development. And this, of course, is inseparable from that concept of identity. So anyway, I mentioned these things in order to say that this concept of calendar in Baha'i faith is symbolic of a new culture, of a new theology, of culture of unity, culture of true conception of identity, spiritual journey, spiritualization of life, and so on. And they are all symbolized in this concept. The only lunar element in Baha'i purely solar calendar has to do with the fact of the unity of manifestations of God. Baha'u'llah wants to affirm that the Bab and Baha'u'llah are one and the same. And for that, he means that all prophets are one and the same. It's the same culture. As a vehicle of expressing this, he says that his birthday and the birthday of the Bab are one and the same. They are considered as the same day. Now, the birthday of the Bab is the 1st of Muharram. Muharram is the first month of the lunar calendar, Islamic lunar calendar. Baha'u'llah is born in the 2nd of Muharram. Baha'u'llah, at the moment of dawn, the Bab close to midnight. So they are very close, actually, really become less than 24 hours. Problem, however, is that if we want to have this consciousness of the unity of Bab and Baha'u'llah through unity of their birthdays, then we cannot have a purely solar calendar, because their birthdays were 2 years apart. And that means that although in lunar calendar they are subsequent days, 1st of Muharram and 2nd day of Muharram, but in the Gregorian calendar they have almost 22 days they are apart, because there are 2 years they are apart from each other. Baha'u'llah is 2 years older than the Bab. And so the 1st of Muharram becomes what? October 20th, something like that. And the 2nd of Muharram for Baha'u'llah becomes November 12 or something like that. So if we want to realize the principles of Baha'u'llah in a symbolic fashion, somehow, although everything should be in a solar fashion, defined in a solar fashion, somehow this lunar element should enter the Baha'i calendar. And this is what the Universal House of Justice legislated. And it is a beautiful, amazing solution. And the idea is that because when Baha'u'llah was born, at that time, Muharram happened to be 8 lunar months after Nowruz. So the Universal House of Justice has decided that the 1st and 2nd of any lunar month, which happens to be the 8th month after Nowruz, should be the days of celebration of the birth of the Bab and birth of Baha'u'llah. So it is within now solar calendar, but also it has the lunar element. And this becomes the only moment in which the solar calendar, Badi solar calendar, has a trace of the lunar element, which is another affirmation of the unity of all religions. Zoroastrianism is there, but the name of months and so on is taken from a Shia sacred prayer. So Islam is here, Zoroastrianism is here, as I mentioned, Aztec civilization, and in my judgment, the closest to Badi calendar is the Aztec calendar, which was very precise. When the Western conquerors came to Americas, they were surprised that the Aztec calendar was more precise than the Julian calendar that they used to know. I talk too much, I know. The problem is that the topic is so complicated. So I hope that you forgive this very, very lengthy taking of your time. Yes, please.
I want to ask a question. Will you entertain some questions?
Sure, please.
It's a two-part question.
Yes.
It has to do with observance of the twin birthdays.
Sheila, would you wait for the microphone, please, so we get it recorded?
Yes, this is a two-part question. The second part has to do with the twin birthdays of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And the first part is a question. I hope that you'll give a short answer because I want you to get to the second part. The first part is regarding the way in the Baha'i calendar and perhaps other calendars with which I'm not familiar, the day begins at sunset. Now, this has always puzzled me because I think of the Baha'i cycle as the dawn coming into the light. And so the significance of a day beginning at sunset instead of sunrise, for example, has always puzzled me. Now, I'm coupling that fact with the question, is there a precedent? Is sunset the beginning of the day in Islam, in Zoroaster's religion, or Jews? I don't think it is for Christians, but you can correct me there. Beginning of the day at sunset puzzles me. Now, let me just bring in my second question, so perhaps you can answer it all at once. Now that we are going to be addressing the idea of observing the twin birthdays of Bab and Baha'u'llah, which fall on consecutive days, and you have just said in your lecture that the Bab was born near midnight of one day and Baha'u'llah in the morning, did you say, of the second day? How has been the practice of observance of these twin birthdays been held in the cradle of the faith by Baha'is, if this was not directly addressed by the central figures of the faith in their lifetimes, the exact observance of the twin birthdays? This would be, the answer you give me is helpful for looking at this next year when we will begin to observe these twin birthdays, November 13th and 14th. How might we consider successful observance of the twin birthdays on a one event or two events, since they're both holy days?
Yes.
It's a sort of long, convoluted, but connected question.
Thank you for the question. The first one, the concept of the day is a natural astronomical concept because many other units of time are not, like week. There is no astronomical or natural basis for that. It's purely arbitrary. After French Revolution, they created a republican calendar. And in that, which begins from the year 1792, emergence of republic. And that was also 360 days, consisting of 12 months, with 5 days as days of sacred days, each day representing one of the concepts of revolution. For instance, one day was the day of reason, and so on. But the week was defined as 10 days. And each day consisted of 10 hours, each hour consisting of 100 minutes, something like that. So they completely changed that. But the concept of the day is a natural concept because it refers to sunrise and sunset. So it's an astronomical concept. And so really, in terms of definition of the day, the concept of sunrise or sunset becomes the natural definition of the day, and so on. The point that you raise is very interesting one, and I never thought about it, and I don't have a particular answer why it begins from the sunset, not the sunrise. But the day becomes 24 hours. We use the word day, but it is day and night, really. But yes, it has precedence. In Islam, the concept of the day is defined exactly in that same fashion. So the sunset becomes the beginning of the day. As far as I know, I'm not 100% sure, but I think in Judaism it is also the same. So the practice of Bab and Baha'u'llah, for example, you are all familiar, he defines his declaration as 2 hours and 11 minutes after sunset. This was a typical pattern of understanding calendar and day and so on in their time, which Baha'i faith has followed that tradition. But there might be some additional reasons and wisdoms that I don't know, but it's an interesting question. The Baha'is of Iran, even in Haifa, when they celebrate the birthdays of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, they celebrate it on the 1st of Muharram and 2nd of Muharram, named on the basis of lunar calendar, in 2 different days. But I don't remember at what particular times of the day. I don't remember, for example, that the celebration would take place at the dawn or at midnight. I don't remember something like that, but it might. But my memory is not good. But it was the 2 different days were perceived as sacred days, and there were celebration. But now we are going to have 2 different days celebrated, but they become the 1st and 2nd day of a lunar calendar, of a lunar month, which sometimes becomes Muharram, sometimes is Safar, sometimes is Rabiul Awwal, sometimes Rabiul Thani, and the like. But it is always the 8th lunar month after Nowruz, after March 21st. The original names of the Islamic lunar calendar has to deal with seasons. Safar means yellow. It was reference to the autumn. And Jumadi Awwal and Jumadi Sani, the first Jumadi and the second Jumadi. Jumadi is from Jamad and Enjamad, means freezing and frozenness. Namely, it was the concept of winter. So the original names of the Islamic lunar calendar are the names of the seasonal changes. But of course, because the lunar calendar does not match that, so this connection of the meaning and names and so on were completely lost. So up to now, the birthday of the Bab and Baha'u'llah were always celebrated in the Middle East as the first day of Muharram and 2nd day of Muharram. From next year, it would be different. Sometimes it happens to be 1st and 2nd of Muharram, but sometimes it is in Safar, sometimes it's in Shawwal, sometimes it's in Sha'ban, sometimes it's in Rajab, sometimes in Zil-Hajj, sometimes in Zil-Qa'dah. These are different names of the lunar calendar. Yes?
It's actually interesting you mentioned about these changes beginning and end of the day. I'm thinking, sorry, just to record. Well, interesting subject about the beginning and the end of the day. If we actually redefine, rather than starting the day with dawn, thinking of ending the day at sunset, then what happens after the day ends? We don't have a vacuum, so there's another day starting. So that could be actually a reason why the day is starting after the sunset, because the previous day has just ended. Now, a comment that our dear friend Rana made was interesting to me, because she says, that actually makes sense, because if you calculate it that way, according to what you said, then these 2 births of the manifestations falls into one day.
Yes. Thank you very much. And it's something that we all can think more about it and explore it more. Yes?
Yes, I was wondering, since we have 4 seasons, okay. Yes, since in the Baha'i solar calendar we have 4 seasons and we have 19 months, I was wondering how do we divide the 19 into 4?
The seasons happen to be on predictable, precise days, and each year it repeats itself. But they are not on the same day of the month. So it is in that sense closer to the Gregorian calendar. In the Gregorian calendar, it's not the beginning of the month, which becomes the time that the new season change starts. It's usually, for instance, 20th or 21st, sometime 19th, sometime maybe even 22nd of the month, which is when a new season starts. So within the Baha'i calendar, seasons would have a consistent pattern, but they don't happen in the beginning of the month or in the same day exactly of the month. They change, but they are easily calculable in terms of when they would fall. Calculation of seasons also, astronomically, there is something, calculation of seasons according to many calendars, something else. And many times the way seasons are defined in terms of different calendars do not match the astronomical conception of calendar, but sometimes they do. But calendars had to make decisions whether the number of months become inconsistent, sometimes 31, sometimes 30, sometimes 29, and so on, or to keep them consistent, for example, all 30 days, but then other inconsistencies would be created and so on. In the Badi calendar, the consistency is 361, and 361 becomes 19 and 19. But then the beginning of seasons, although they are completely predictable, but they happen at different days of the month, of different months, and is not the same. It's not the same day, nor they are the beginning of the month.
And also with these new changes, are the other Baha'i holidays affected at all?
Very little changes. One of the changes is about martyrdom of the Bab. In one of the tablets of Abdul Baha, he mentions the celebration of martyrdom of the Bab on the day of Sultan, if I remember. And that means that it becomes July 10th. Normally it becomes July 10th. Sometimes it may change. And normally martyrdom of the Bab has been celebrated or remembered, commemorated July 9th, which is actually closer to the time that the event has happened. But since Abdul Baha indicated the day of Sultan, if I remember, as the time for remembering the martyrdom of the Bab, Universal House of Justice has decided that from now on, martyrdom of the Bab would be celebrated in accordance with the wish of Abdul Baha. So one day becomes different. Other things about Nowruz also becomes different. We had a lot of problem in the West celebrating Nowruz when the New Year begins, when the fast, because there was a different set of rules. Those rules are going to be gone, and new rules are going to emerge. So the concept of the year is going to be defined in terms of astronomical event. And that's equinox, when night and day are equal and so on. And if this happens, if I remember according to Baha'u'llah, before sunset, then that day is the first of spring, the day of Baha is Nowruz. If it happens, the moment of equinox happens after sunset, because as is what mentioned, the day is defined in terms of sunset is the beginning of a new day. Therefore, that next day becomes, which means literally the same thing, namely it is after sunset, becomes the Nowruz, or the first day of the calendar. So in this way, sometimes it was an awkward situation that people would fast in the West, even if Nowruz has taken place at least or even more than 1 day in advance. We are not going to have that problem anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.